Welcome to another episode of the Tech Exception Show. My name is Ruth Yakubu, and in today's episode, we have a brilliant startup, ThroughPut AI, joining us today. And in today's discussion, I'm going to be having a conversation with Bhaskar Ballapragada, who is the CEO of ThroughPut AI. And in today's discussion, we're going to be talking about building smart supply chain forecasting with AI. Bhaskar, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It is a pleasure to be on the show too. Thanks, Ruth.
Great. So Bhaskar, before we start, let me do some quick housekeeping. For the audience that are streaming live, if you have any questions for Bhaskar, please post your questions in the chat window. And at the end of the discussion, we'll be sure to answer all the amazing comments or questions that you have. So Bhaskar, can you tell us a little bit about ThroughPut AI and what problem is the company solving?
Sure. So ThroughPut leverages and melds diverse and often siloed data sets across your supply chain into the Eli software to provide better operations and better business outcomes. So if you think about it, think of Eli sitting between the physical world and the digital world, right? And so and the ThroughPut software contains different modules. We have a operations module, we have a manufacturing module, we have a distribution module, finance module, and the purpose is to provide things such as increased output, profitability, inventory turns, and better lead times, etc. Right? Now the challenge is the physical world is still highly disconnected. And ThroughPut leverages many technologies. In fact, many of the software, Microsoft Azure technologies, including Databricks, in cleaning, stitching, and transforming the data into the Eli's specialized format.
Oh, that's good to know. So you mentioned different silos that are in the supply chains. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some of the examples of the targeted industries that you've worked with in the past?
Right. So we do end-to-end supply chain, which means raw materials, all the way to to the distribution endpoints. And if you think of industries, pretty much every industry requires or needs supply chain, right? From acquiring the raw materials to storing them, to manufacturing, to warehousing, the finished goods to distribution, and so we cover all of them. Now, if you want to, if you want to narrow down the focus, the way we do it is, we say discrete process and discrete manufacturing. But we cover, we work with industries, from plastics manufacturing to cement to retail, etc.
Great. So when you're dealing with the end-to-end supply chain, that's not just on the manufacturing side. You're thinking of the fleet trucks that are actually going to deliver some of these goods, pricing. There are a whole gamut of things that fall in the supply chain. I had no idea you guys work with all of that. And to me, all it's sounding is you guys are dealing with a lot of data. So can you tell us what type of data sources, when you work with clients, that you deal with, you have to work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So when if you start thinking about all of the various types of data sources that are there, it seems overwhelming. But all of them have one thing in common, and that is they have timestamp data, right? And so whether you're looking at order data or sales data, on the front end, to movement data, which is kind of used, moving goods from one place to another, machine data, whether you have uptime, downtime, how much time it takes to produce a given item, to again inventory management, where you keep inventory levels on a daily basis. We store timestamp data across the board in each of the systems, and so our system is essentially designed to do that. So if you have timestamp data, we can ingest it and we can pull it in. And so now, if you look at the types of data sources, well, you can think about the ERP sources, right? ERP solutions. Microsoft has it, SAP, Oracle. There are specialized ERP solutions that are cloud-based. For example, for automotive, manufacturing execution systems. So, for example, for airlines, there's InfoDreams. Inventory management. Again, all of them contain, again, they have one thing in common, which is timestamp data, and that's how we kind of standardize everything within our platform.
Oh, that's great to know. Thanks for the breakdown. So when it comes to machine learning and AI, how does ThroughPut utilize machine learning or AI? What are the techniques that you're using, given the data, to solve the solution for your platform?
Absolutely. So there are kind of three places that I can narrow down and say we use machine learning and AI techniques. The first step is in data transformation processes. Right? Again, we talked about data being highly disparate and in different formats. So we want to bring them in and convert them into what we call as a standardized architecture. But along the way, there is a lot of cleanup that's needed. There's a lot of outliers that need to be thrown out or managed. And for all of this, we use some standard AI techniques. We use, in fact, Azure Databricks to help us with some of the transformations, both in terms of the types of transformations that we do, as well as the skill associated with it. Then the second aspect of AI comes into what we call as demand sensing. This is not demand forecasting. This is much more than that, which is to be able to figure out what's happening in real time and use general relative models to be able to help us with that. And finally, well, what does this all mean to the supply chain, right? And so we take that information to be able to figure out how do you manage your supply chain better. And this involves, what your inventory levels need to be. How do you need to run your processes or your machines in order to meet the demand, right? And so we use, standard optimization or constraint programming techniques to be able to solve that problem.
Yeah, given the preface that you gave us with the supply chain end to end. All the different services that you've listed definitely covers the end-to-end.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the data because you mentioned some pretty heavy weights. Dynamics CRM is there. SAP is a huge data source. Oracle. So it makes sense to use a solution like Databricks because you're getting all kinds of unstructured data coming in. And with the cleansing, it does make sense to use Databricks for the ETL transformations within a big data type of scenario.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's and this is where, and so we are, so one thing that we do is we the transformation process essentially takes only certain parts of their data that are relevant to our platform, and again these are some very key metrics within the supply chain. You're looking at metrics around your inventory turns, cycle time, uptime, downtime, defect rate, lead time, and things like that. So we take that data, but essentially, the data has to be obviously have to be mapped properly, then converted, cleaned up, and you would be surprised, the type of information that needs to be cleaned up, both from a perspective of incomplete information, but also a lot of null values and things like that come through that have to be handled along the way. Right? But that comes in, and we use specialized algorithms to transform that data into the final format that is necessary.
Yeah, and Databricks definitely does a good job with their services to provide good visualization, to do query, to actually have different ways of looking at your data. So I can see why you guys decided to choose the Azure Databricks solution. Now let's talk about COVID because COVID, for some of us that may not know the end-to-end undertakings of a supply chain, on the consumer front, COVID was disruptive. We saw a whole bunch of shortage in, as crazy as it sounds, toilet paper shortages, ventilation shortages, food shortages, and even now with the distribution of the vaccines, you have to handle supply chain. So for me, when it comes to machine learning, one of the things that we thrive on is historical data. You learn from past data, but nothing about COVID. I don't think somebody had historical data of what to expect when there's a pandemic. And airline, you can't even ship things overseas. Everything came to a shutdown. Even the factories, people can't go to work. So it seemed like the traditional way of doing demand forecasting, to me, it's almost like you toss it out the window. So I'm curious how ThroughPut was able to handle demand forecasting in an unusual circumstance like that.
Absolutely. No, you're 100% right in terms of your assessment of what the current system does and how it's unable to handle a situation like COVID or any other situation that might come that we have not planned for or have not seen, right? And the reason is traditional forecasting models, or models that are even used pretty much in the industry. They look at historical data and look at the trends, look at the seasonality, and predict the future. But as we all know, that's in real life. That's there's more to it than that. Without a question, there is looking at historical performance. You can get some insights and be able to predict predict at a higher level what the forecast or the demand might be. However, it is not able to predict some of the events that we have not seen before. So we kind of use much more than just a time series at ThroughPut in order to be able to get a deeper understanding and get better forecast, or as we call as demand sensing, right? And what typically what that involves essentially is incorporating in all kinds of other parameters and feature sets to be able to predict short-term demand. And some of the examples, and we all know, for example, that marketing promotions has an impact on demand. We know pricing has an impact on demand. And so there are, in certain industries or certain sectors, weather, if it's in the agricultural or construction industry, weather can have an impact. But in this specific instance that we are talking about COVID, right? None of those would have mattered, right? But what would have mattered is if we had incorporated some of the supply chain variables in the mix. So what I mean by that, this is essentially making sure that you're including your POS data in your predictions or the forecasting. This is making sure that you're looking at order data and order backlog in order to be able to do the forecasting. This is making sure you're looking at your lead times both internally as well as from your suppliers, and those would have absolutely caught some of these rapid changes in the demand much faster. And in fact, we did that in the instances that we have worked with. One was a large retail out of Europe that that has issues with paper products, and we were able to actually detect this much earlier. Now, it wasn't a month earlier, of course, but it was definitely much earlier than what other companies were able to detect some of the disruptions, and they were able to take action. Right, they were able to essentially limit, for example, the number of products that a single consumer can take. Right, they were able to talk to their suppliers, preemptively and get selective preferential treatment in terms of being able to get the supply. And there are things like that they were able to do. Very similarly even in the case of one of the plastics manufacturing company that we worked with, kind of was able to take that information and essentially modify their machines, their injection molding machines, to manufacture a certain type of bottle that was a much more higher demand compared to the other. So without a question, these things can be these can be detected if you set it up correctly. If you set up your demand forecasting and how you're going to react to the demand correctly.
Okay. So it sounds to me like you guys were definitely, the way you guys initially set up your solution, you were utilizing the traditional time series where, seasons can happen, but you're seeing a trend, and let's say there's a sudden drop in the graph or the number of orders or given time. If something happens, okay, there's an anomaly in this time series analysis. But it sounds like for throughput, on top of time series demand forecasting, you guys were able to use demand sensing, which is in a form of predictive analytics, but you guys already infuse certain key indicators in your features that, okay, if the weather goes awry, it triggers a prediction. Mm-hmm. If there's a shortage or a high demand in sales or promotion or whatnot, it does trigger some kind of prediction. So you guys were able to thrive based upon the model that you were able to build.
Absolutely. And that's traditionally, for forecasting, people use time series prediction, whether it is using ARIMA, SARIMA, seasonal ARIMA type models. We use general additive model that essentially it makes it easier to add these feature sets or these regressors. And to a certain degree, having the domain knowledge is important because you kind of know before, and some of them I already mentioned, whether it is looking at the order data, looking at the lead time data, because all of those have a certain impact on both predicting how the demand functions, as well as on the back end in terms of what inventory levels you need to keep. Right. So incorporating some of those things, stock levels, for example, those are incorporated into. And then of course we have a special function for special events that a user can put in. And this is, so if, for example, a customer saw a supply disruption, you can tag that in, and that if for any future events, we can predict that. So those are some of the things that you can use in demand sensing to be able to quickly react to the changing demand conditions.
Okay, so not only can we plan weeks in advance, the demand sensing model that you guys have, you can plan within days and even within hours based upon your model, to have a better forecasting when it comes to supply and demand.
Correct.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Correct.
So
so our standard frequencies on a daily basis. We do forecasts on a daily basis, but that can vary depending on the industry and the situation.
Awesome. So I'm curious, for, let's say I'm a developer, I'm getting into creating time series, also creating predictive analytics with demand sensing. Did you guys use any open source solutions out there that can help somebody leverage libraries that are already existing?
Sure. For in our case, for the demand sensing, we've leveraged Profit library for analysis, and for some of the constraint programming, we use OR tools.
Okay, awesome. Well, Bhaskar, this was an amazing conversation. On the consumer side, it kind of gives you a good glimpse of what happens in the back end. For me, worrying about why I'm ordering things and it's giving me a long wait time, and also looking at companies like you that were able to rise to the occasion, giving something that most of us in our lifetime had not experienced before, but to be able to help enterprises be resilient and be able to fulfill the supply and demand using AI, I think that's very commendable.
No, you are absolutely right. This essentially takes us in the direction of making sure that our supply chain is resilient, which is it's able to react to the demand quickly. And the other aspect of it is that demand is looked at as a one-way street, right? And it is not, because you have a lot of levers on your toolkit to be able to manage and modify, at least on a short-term basis, to be able to handle some of these events.
Okay, so I have a question. So I'm curious, going forward, a lot of us learned from the pandemic and have made adjustments just in case in the future some natural disaster happens, how to handle things. So with AI, we do have the traditional way of solving things. Time series will still continue, because let's say everything goes back to normal, is still valid. It provides good insight with your predictive analytics, using machine learning and whatnot. Do you feel like the old way of doing things will be tossed out the window, and we all will move to demand sensing that, okay, let's look in real time if anything is about to happen? What's your opinion?
Oh, no, that's a great question. So I think both have to live. You still need the time series analysis in order to be able to get the seasonality, and for the most part, that is going to work fine. But you do need to have these other pieces, these other feature sets that can address some of these unplanned events, right? And for the most part, they'll kind of sit in the background, but so long as those are in there, when the time comes, you should be able to pick those, some of these events up much better than what we were able to last time around.
Okay, awesome. Well, it looks like we have 5 minutes to go. Do you have any parting words, especially for you going through what we've been through, being an expert? I feel like you've gone through the fire and on the other end. Where do you see the future of AI and supply chain going forward?
Absolutely. So the way I see it is, AI helps, when things are complex or things get complex, and it is hard for humans or standard BI solutions to, sift through, a few variables, more than a few variables at a time. Right? And really, that's why AI comes into play. Supply chains inherently are complex, not just because of the interactions that they have, but the interactions they have over a period of time. And so we talk about lead time because anything that you do right now has an impact a little bit down the road, right? And so there's added complexity associated with that. Now, the other aspect of it is while data is available, a lot of companies, they still want to keep it proprietary to themselves, which makes it a little bit more difficult. But if we can figure out a way in which we can, in fact, pull information from different places together, there's a lot of potential, to further continue to develop it, so that we don't have to face these issues going forward.
Awesome. That was nicely put. Bhaskar, it's a pleasure again to have you on the show, and appreciate all the wisdom that you brought and all the lessons that you've learned and were able to share with the audience. And for the audience watching, thanks for tuning in, and be sure to tune in to next week's episode. We have another exceptional and amazing startup similar to ThroughPut AI joining us next week. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay.